Welcome, everyone, to America's Heroes Group, the first inaugural recording of myself, Dr. D, the founder and CEO of Glass Soldier. I'm excited to be here, and I hope you're excited to go on this journey with me. So, in case you have been a fan of America's Heroes Group for a while, or this is your first time listening in, thank you so much for coming in and listening to what I myself have to say about Glass Soldier, about the state of veterans and our military in terms of mental health and really driving awareness around sexual assault. So, the point of this podcast really is to introduce myself, to introduce what Glass Soldier is, the mission going forward, and then the call to action to you, the audience, and how you can be a part of this. To me, it's obvious that you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to this broadcast because you are very interested or interested in what's going on in the state of our military personnel, our military service connected personnel to include family members, spouses, and children, and how our larger community can support them. So, again, my name is Dr. D. Government name Dr. Diandra Poe, but I'm more affectionately known as Dr. D. So, just to kind of give you a background of who I am and how I came to be here with you all today. So, the point, I guess I'll start from the beginning of my journey. I joined the military when I was 31 years old, 2011. But prior to that, and how I came to join at 31, I was actually married to a service member almost directly out of high school. It's your classic boy meets girl in high school story, except for mine spanned 10 years in an abusive marriage. The entire time that I was a military spouse, though, I was very much involved and connected to the Family Readiness Group. In the Army, we call it the FRG. In other branches like the Navy, they call it Fleet and Family Services. But the point of that organization is to really help family members connected to the commander and the Army in itself, bring themselves into what the soldiers are going through to help support the families, the spouses during times of deployment and also back in at home. And so I became involved and I've told this story quite a bit over the last few years, but it still brings up emotions because I know that there are men and women that are still experiencing DV in the military. And in some cases, they're still having to fight for justice. They're still having to go through the same processes that I went through almost over 20 years ago. And so after deciding that I wanted to get out of this very bad situation and trying to come up with a plan, my then husband's commander took an interest in me because I was running his FRG program in a way that he'd never seen before. And he really appreciated what I was doing. And so he kind of dropped the seed in me and he said, you know what, Deandra, you're going to make a great officer one day. And I laughed in his face because I really didn't see myself going into the Army at all. But he began to mentor me. He began to help me train for PT. I went to camp just to see if this is something that I wanted to do. And sure enough, I was like, yes, let's do this. And so that kind of started my journey, 2007, 2000, the end of 2008. I got accepted into George Washington University into the ROTC program. Unfortunately for me, there was a lot of things that I didn't know and he didn't know. But again, I was 30 years old. So when I arrived here at GW, for some reason, leadership wasn't tracking that. You have to commission before the age of 31, unless your school is willing to write basically a waiver to say, yeah, we know that she's older, but we're going to take her anyway. She's motivated. She can do this. GW was not willing to do that. And this is no shade to GW at all. because I've met some really great people that came through the program. But I had found myself in a situation now where I was unhoused. I was not in school. And so there were a few months where I was sleeping on people's couches in dorm rooms because the alternative was going back home to my soon to be ex husband, because I was trying to divorce him at the time, and put myself back into another domestic situation. And I did, because I was not in school and unhoused. I found myself back at his doorstep. I guess the fortunate thing for me is that he was stationed here in Maryland and I was right in DC. And so through recruiting and some other people that saw my potential, I wind up getting a waiver to go to Bowie State University, which is not far from Fort Meade. So the entire time that I was at Fort Meade and going to Bowie State University, he was sort of removed from the house. The last incident that we had made the decision that this was like the end of our marriage. And I knew then that the Army was, at least his leadership, wasn't going to step in and help. And that kind of just fueled me even more to become an officer, to make sure that I took care of soldiers the way that I've seen some of the leadership fail. And I say some because we all know that it's not everyone, including my mentor. His former commander were one of the very few people that I had the privilege of working with and knowing that helped me understand that this is not the norm. And so in 2011, I commissioned from Bowie State University into the Transportation Corps. Also not on my radar. I had plans of becoming a lawyer. That was the goal of me going to GW. That was the goal of me going into sociology and pre-law and studying law, doing a lot of things with law at Bowie State University. But as God would have it, my appendix burst right before I was supposed to go to camp and right in the middle of me taking my LSATs. And I took that as a sign that I was not supposed to be a lawyer. That was not the direction I was going in. I really wish there would have been a less dramatic way of me not going into law. But nonetheless, I trained really hard over the next couple of weeks because my leadership was concerned between my age and me being very short. I'm not going to tell anybody how short I am. And then on top of it, this medical issue, was I going to be able to pass advanced camp? But I did. I had a really great friend of mine who I went to high school with, who was also in the Army and just happened to live in Bowie, Maryland, trained me and got me ready for advanced camp. And I did, and I went. And so I commissioned in 2011. Like everyone else in their ROTC journey, I had to go to BOLIC, just basic officer leader course. But what's important to this story and going forward subsequently was that because I was an older and non-traditional student at Bowie State University, there were a lot of things that I wasn't taught or given knowledge of around sexual assault, sexual harassment, because most of the leadership were my peers in terms of age. And that's important. And I want you to put a pin on that going forward, because whenever you hear me talk going forward, it's important that we understand the dynamics, especially today when we have people going in that are older and not just straight out of high school. I was talked to and I was looked at as a peer often, and not just as a cadet, as if I had it. And so there was a lot of confusion about my life skills versus my tactical skills. And so going to BOLIC, going into my first duty assignment, those things played a role. And so fast forward, I'm done with BOLIC right before Thanksgiving, I believe. and I get to my first duty assignment. Now, again, I left out a critical piece, and I hope my children forgive me. Was a mother of three incredible people, 2 boys and a girl. And in the midst of leaving that abusive relationship, commissioning, and getting to my new duty assignment, my children stayed here at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is where we were, while I got things ready for them at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which was my first assignment. I wanted them to at least finish out the first half of the year and come around Christmas time so they can do their second half. Anyone who has been married to a service member or been in a service with their children understand that PCSing, pulling your kids out of school, is a task in itself. My middle son is on the spectrum, and so there was a lot that had to be put in place and things that I had to do as a mother of a special needs kid. So again, I get there December 1st, 2011. And like everyone else who comes into the military, you have to in process. And they separate the officers from enlisted. I was in processing with one other person while the enlisted were kind of walked through the process. They kind of look at officers like, surely you can figure this out. And they sent us off to do that. They basically give you a paper and send you on a scavenger hunt to find buildings that have numbers on them and no street addresses. It's an awful game that they play when you're coming in and when you're leaving the military. And so this person presented himself as an ally and said, hey, like I've done this before, because he outranked me. Let me help you. And that's key to the story as well. And going forward, when I teach on mental health and prevention, it's key because this person presented themselves very much as someone who could help me. I'm new. I am an LT, and my children aren't there yet. So absolutely, I'm taking the help, right? Children come for Christmas. This person has introduced me to my children. And I go through, the continuing the onboarding and processing, journey that all service members go through. Within the 2 months that I'm there, I have to have dental surgery. And on the day after, I believe, or that day, he comes over at night. My children are in their rooms and going to sleep. And he assaults me while my children are asleep. I have told this story, obviously, several times. I've had to testify. My children have had to be subpoenaed during this. And the journey from the time that he assaulted me until I came forward spanned a couple of months because, again, there were some things that I did not learn while I was in ROTC, and that was, who do I turn to when something like this happens? Who do I report? As a woman of faith, I immediately called the chaplain because I didn't know where to go. It's not the wrong answer, but the chaplain had to put me in touch with the people that could help me. And so at first I did not want to come forward. I filed in the military what they call a restricted report. And you have two options. Restricted, meaning you don't want to tell the police who it was or, as many details as possible, but you just want help. You don't want leadership involved or anything like that. And then there's unrestricted, where you want a full-on investigation. I chose to restrict mine out of fear because of this person's rank and the things that they were saying to me. It took me several months to come forward after a lot of other things and things that I'm going to be willing to share as we talk about mental health, survivorship, and prevention through this podcast. I was expedited, what they called an expedited transfer, to Fort Hood, Texas. After I came forward for my safety and my children's safety, I eventually went to trial he received 5 years in prison and is a registered sex offender. I spent the better part of the 6 years that I was in the military really advocating for myself, my children. It took 2 years to go to trial. So you have to think this happened at the top of 2012. We didn't go to trial until July of 2014. I was out of the military by 2016. So from the time that I went to trial until the time that it left in those 2 years, there was a lot of retaliation, a lot of learning about myself, a lot of learning about mental health and triggers and things that were going on with me that I yet understood and was trying to navigate, all while trying to maintain my career. I absolutely and emphatically did not want to get out. I was for sure that I would spend 20 years in. That was the goal. But again, God has a funny way of directing your path in a different way. And so a social worker saved my life just when I was about ready to give up and make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. She gave me another chance. And because of that, the next month I enrolled in getting my master's degree in social work. And I have been on this journey of prevention and sexual assault ever since then. I am motivated by my tragedy, but I am passionate about my purpose and helping other survivors. The point of this podcast is to do just that. And again, I left out parts of my story, and there are nuances and things that are a part of it, that are a part of prevention and a part of this work and a part of my story and a part of my purpose, that I am excited to bring to this audience, especially if you have someone in your life. Yes, there's the uniqueness about service members and veterans and what we go through, all of the nuances of having to serve while surviving. But these things are also applicable to anyone, including our civilian population, not just for sexual assault survivors who have not served, but for family members who are trying to love someone through sexual violence, for those that have family members that may have been assaulted and are trying to support them and figure out how to help them, for our civilian organizations and counterparts that want to partner with people like myself and other organizations to figure out how do we support veterans and the uniqueness and what they need. This is what this podcast is for. This is the point of me bringing this to you. So fast forward 2020, here comes Glass Soldier. I was about a year or two into my master's program and working on my thesis and gearing up to go into my PhD or doctoral program. And Glass Soldier came to me. It was like the push of right now, right now, right now. I thought of Glass Soldier as I was waiting for my trial in 2014, but I didn't know how I was going to do that and wear this uniform. And so here I was, nearly 4 years removed from the uniform. And that's when I felt that tap on the back of the head or the shoulder, starting Glass Soldier again. So when it was still being called the coronavirus, we had this great idea to start Glass Soldier to address the whole stay-at-home orders and everyone's on the internet. And so I was 1 year into my doctoral program when I started Glass Soldier, because I was working on my dissertation, and my dissertation was focused around military sexual assault reporting. And so we started hosting webinars. That's really what we wanted to do in the beginning, was address the issue of service members not wanting to come forward. Who do they report to? What kind of reporting mechanisms can we innovate to help service members? And that's still very much a core mission of ours, but we've expanded over the last couple of years. So, the primary goals of Glass Soldier is to support, prevent, and eliminate sexual assault from our military. That is all branches, not just Army. I speak Army, but I also understand the language of pain, and that is across every branch. So that is at the core of what we do. Our core values are what we call ACT, A-C-T, and that means accountability, collaboration, and transparency. To hold those accountable who have done harm, hold those accountable who are inactionable when harm is being done, and to hold ourselves accountable as an organization to focus on what needs to happen, and that's the prevention part. And then there's the collaboration part, the C, and that is to collaborate with the DoD, with outside organizations, to include civilian organizations, to have wraparound services and support for our active duty military who are afraid to come forward, and our veterans who may not have the means or opportunity to get support from the VA because they are also overwhelmed. And then the transparency, and that's in our message, that's in our branding, that's in our prevention work, to be transparent in everything that we do. And ACT became a part of our for-profit organization, which is ACT to End, which means accountability, collaboration, transparency, to engage, network, and demand. And you already know what those words means, and that's exactly what we do. Engage, we network, and we demand change. So the highlight of our organization is really trying to come up with those innovative ways to disrupt systems that don't harm the mission or even the DoD's mission of having a strong force. But we're only as strong as the people that are in there. And so we want to disrupt, but not harm. And then to remain data-driven, collecting the data, understanding what's happening, boots on the ground. Because leaders love to make decisions and not understand the second and third order effect of the people in which they're making these policies, these procedures, these rules, and these regulations for, right? I grew up with the phrase, rules without relationship equal rebellion. And so we have to develop a relationship with the DoD, with these organizations, but more importantly, with our soldiers, to not just tell them this is why you do this, but the relationship that comes with it, getting to know your service members, the connectedness of building a strong force. So that is Glass Soldier at its core, and what we're trying to do. Building our programs to address PTSD, to address our workshops that help with prevention, our fundraising efforts so that we can have MST-focused retreats, MST-focused webinars, and MST-focused prevention. So that is a part of what Glass Soldier is doing. On this podcast, my goal is to educate you on the mental health aspect about PTSD as it relates to MST, and everything else that comes along with it. And so I'll be talking about various things in terms of mental health, suicide, women, veteran issues, survivorship in terms of men, and hope, bringing on male survivors and other voices to this podcast that can help elevate the voice of veterans and survivors at large, right? Partnering with organizations as well, and not just the voices that agree with us, but the voices that don't, right? Because there's opposition clearly, or otherwise there would be a lot more. There will be a lot more people sitting in jail. There will be a lot more leaders who are held accountable. And so there's pushback. And my hope is to bring on those people that are offering the pushback, and for them to be brave enough to come up and say why. We need to understand so that we can come together collaboratively, not just to, go back and forth, but to find common ground, and hopefully, they'll give us the playbook of why they're pushing back, and we can put our playbook together and say why you shouldn't. So that, also a part of what we're going to do on the show, and highlight that everything is not going to be bad. I like to think of myself as a funny person, so I'll definitely be bringing some humor to some of this because, yeah, you have to laugh to keep yourself from crying. I'm sure you've all heard that before. um, and so I'm very excited about being a part of America's Heroes Group. There's real life impact to what this organization is doing, what I'm trying to do going forward. So I cannot wait to come and share success stories and testimonies from people that I've worked with, and hopefully the audience as well. We'll discuss our measurable impacts and achievements along the way. And I'm excited that you get to come along with me, because Glass Soldier will be doing our official relaunch 1 October. So know that every second Wednesday of this month, you will hear more and more about us. Next month, I will be able to give you more about what we're doing, those measurable goals, those support systems, those collaborative partners, and recognizing those people that are here to help us. I think the last thing that I want to say, and I've said this before in, every area that I'm in, time is a finite resource. It's one that I cannot give back to you once it's spent. So whenever someone gives me their time, I'm extremely grateful for that. I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again next time.